Dr. China, thank you so much for being part of this episode.
You're so welcome.
We've been trying to make this happen, and we're finally here.
A while.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I mean, I should start with a trigger warning of sorts, right? We're going to be talking about a topic that, for a lot of people, it's triggering, right? Absolutely. And so we're discussing grief and how to deal with grief. And, it's interesting because, people listen to this, I think that they'll be in two places. One is they're currently dealing with grief, and so this is very sort of heavy, and we'll do our best to make it somewhat light. Or for others, it's not their current reality, but I think it's almost certain that at some stage they will deal with grief, yep. And so we have to kind of unpack that as well. But, you're a doctor, this is what you do, it's day in, day out. We should probably start with addressing what grief actually is. I ask that because I think people probably have different ideas around grief. So should we start there? What is grief?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. There's probably a conventional answer and there's more of an essential answer. To me, through the work that I've been doing, I've come to understand that grief it's an indication of value. It's actually saying that this thing, this person, this situation held value for me. And as a consequence of its loss, I feel something. So it's the experience of a loss, and it usually is indicating value. So it's probably a good way to start thinking about grief, particularly as you're beginning to encounter it.
And that's interesting because it then means what grief is not just about losing people, is it?
Nope.
In that if you lose something of value, that could be a relationship.
Absolutely.
It could be even an object that meant a lot to you. Is it possible to then experience grief with those things?
Absolutely. And I think sometimes when we think about grief, we think about a very narrow band of experiences. Okay, it's when you lose a parent or, another loved one. But it can be, just as you said, any range of things. It can be a job opportunity. It can be a career. It can be coming to the end of a career if you're retiring, or the prospect of a relationship, a friendship that used to kind of persist for a long time and suddenly has changed in its nature or in its rhythm. That can kind of induce that grief experience as well. So all sorts of things. It's really our experience of loss.
And in your work, how do people approach it, just generally? I mean, what are the categories of sort of approaches you've seen when it comes to grief?
Oh, all sorts. There are lots of different ways. And I think it's a good thing that there are lots of different approaches because we're all so different. And I think our experience of grief is very different. For some people, it's a thing of actually understanding what are the different emotions that come up while you're experiencing grief or you're moving through grief. And so there are certain models that look at the fact that at first you may be experiencing shock, and then you kind of move into a deep sadness that may be accompanied by maybe anger or a sense of bargaining. Okay, maybe if I do things differently, then maybe I'll still be able to have something of that person's essence in my life. A difficulty with accepting really the fact of the loss and then coming to terms with it eventually. So the kind of motions of emotions, that's one way of dealing with loss and with grief. Another approach is to look at the actual work of grief, not looking at grief as an experience that kind of happens upon you or that you move into, but rather a series of tasks that you're charged with in the process of saying goodbye to someone or something and saying hello to something new, to an iteration of life or existence in the absence of that person. So it really depends on the shape of the person, the nature of the loss, and the kind of process that they'd like to move through. But there are lots of different ways to approach grief.
I find it interesting because I feel like some people maybe naturally are better at saying bye than others. I mean, not to trivialize this, but I remember being young, I hated saying bye.
I wouldn't.
I just, even if I was having a games night and it's getting to 10 and you're like, yo, it's time for people to go. I'm like, no, guys, let's stay here forever. Why is it that some people are just sort of more good at maybe saying bye and some people find it really hard, like myself?
Yeah, sometimes I think about it in a really kind of psychodynamic way. This is going to the real technicalities of psychotherapy, but there's a concept called object permanence. And it's an idea for a child that, if there's a ball on the table and you take the ball away, there are two kinds of reactions. The child may just be like, what the heck has gone on? You've taken this ball, like what's ever going to happen? And then there's a child that understands, okay, you've taken it away, but it's in your hand. Like, when are you going to put it back on the table kind of thing? So for some of us, I think we're more prepared to appreciate that, okay, something's gone, That's fine. Maybe something will take its place. Maybe something will happen afterwards. And for others, it's a bit more of a struggle to envision an existence without that person or thing. So I think on some really deep subconscious level, there's something around that happening. But for me, I still struggle to watch the last episode of series. Like, it's just I like these characters. They persist in my mind. They're still doing their thing. There's still, this kind of dramatic tension. It's all happening because it's really hard to say goodbye sometimes.
I wonder, and we're going to get into all of this in detail, but I do wonder what part your Christian faith plays as well in your approach to therapy, to psychotherapy.
Yeah.
I read psycho-interrogative or something like that. Yeah, am I saying the right things?
Yeah,
okay.
Oh, integrative.
Integrative, that's the one, not interrogative. That sounds like you're working for the...
Right, give me all the answers.
For the police or something. No, but what part does your faith play? Because I still think, for some people listening, they might be like, Christians and therapy, does that even go together? Isn't therapy for people who aren't Christian?
That's a really good question. For me, it's never been that they're at opposite ends of the spectrum. First and foremost, when you're coming into a therapeutic space as a therapist, you're making room for someone at the point of their experience. And from that perspective, the therapeutic space, as far as I'm concerned, is really a space to contain a person with their current perspectives, their current worldviews, their current understandings of existence. So whatever a person comes with, there's room for that. And I think it's really important to make room for all of the aspects of a person. When we talk about integrated well-being, we're talking about a picture of wholeness, and it's understanding how the human being is comprised, really, that there's a biological aspect to us, there's a psychological and emotional aspect to us, there's a relational aspect to us, that we're made to connect with others, and there's also a spiritual aspect to us. There's something intangible, something essential, something persisting beyond the kind of mortal frame. And I think making room for our understanding and our interaction with these different aspects of ourselves is really crucial. To me, as a Christian, I understand therapy to be a reflection of the way that God tends to interact with us, that he loves to kind of cultivate transformation through conversation. This is something that he's done from the very beginning of, our earliest scriptures. When we look at the book of Genesis, it's God speaking with Adam. And through that, Adam starts to understand how to interact with his environment, what's happened when things have gone wrong, which primarily affected his relationship with God. And then how best to put us back together has always been through conversation. We realize something and then we do differently. It's this interplay between these different facets of ourselves. So for me, it's not therapy or Jesus. Neither is it therapy and Jesus. But it's therapy in the context of Jesus, understanding that this was his idea. And we have the privilege of kind of apprenticing under him as we practice with each other.
Where do you reckon the ideas come from, that there's this sort of battle or difference between, pursuing therapy, seeing a therapist, talking about stuff like mental health and whatever, and sort of being a Christian or a believer? Like, where do you think that tension has come from?
It dates back quite far, I would say. But there was a time when there wasn't any such dichotomy. There wasn't a division, really. In a sense, between church and state, I think we'd be getting into that kind of conversation where actually there was a space that everyone, regardless of their creed, color, knew that there was a safe space to come to and ask some of the more existential questions of life. What does it mean to love? How do we preserve one another beyond the physical? How do we move through this life? How do we seek and make meaning of our experiences? And for many spaces, the religious spaces were the central kind of points for those kinds of conversations for a long, long time in the West. In particular, the church really was established, once the gospel did reach this end of things. And people would come, I remember reading a letter, in the medieval ages, of a woman who wanted to understand how best to interact with her husband, and she went to the local priest, and the priest was saying, you must listen to your husband. What is it that he's saying to you? And actually trying to coach her through interacting with this man that she doesn't really know. She's just married him, very, very new. And it's so interesting to see therapy taking place in a Christian context. It's not something that we often get a view on, but somewhere down the line, the church, as it were, began to lose their grip on the integration of word and deed. and we stopped kind of actively applying the principles of wisdom that have informed so many different worldviews since that time. And that's been the real shame, because then we hold the Bible and we say that we're Christian and we're pious, but we're not actually living out the principles that would demonstrate that this is a workable way of life. And so the light in the world dimmed, as it were, I found, and the world had to find some other kindling, some other way to illuminate their environment. And so that's when secular exploration into the human mind and psyche began. And we see kind of proponents like Freud and people like that who began to ask the questions, why are we the way that we are? Why do we interact in the ways that we do? And we find amazing kind of insights from their work, these moments of brilliance that are really quite incredible. And it shows us something, to my mind, of the common grace that God shows to all of mankind, that there are things that we can understand about reality and existence simply by observing the material realm. But the context and completeness of those revelations I find are missing when we disconnect them from source. And I think it's that separation where we left the exploration to people who desperately wanted the answers but didn't have any acknowledgement of the source of those answers, and instead kind of rested on this nebulous, well, we just trust that God will take control of things and he will sort things out. Yes, but how? Because he's actually given us the ability to interact with each other and our environment. And the better we can understand that, the better we can navigate this space. So it's more of a reintegration that I think is happening now. And it's a really powerful thing to see people interacting with their faith in ways that are actually practicable, actually living. And it's great. It's really great.
I mean, this is so fascinating. I can listen to you talk about that forever, because I just find it so interesting that statement you mentioned, transformation through conversation, is so apt, because I do wonder, and some people listen to this won't be Christians, but I do think it is true in a lot of faith traditions that there seems to be a fear of conversation and a fear of, let's sort of empty our bags and put it all on the table. I don't know when this happened historically, when you've lost someone really important to you, and the response that say some pastors or faith leaders can muster is, be strong. And you kind of go,
it is well.
It is well. It is what it is. Some people will say, or like, God takes God gives and he takes away. You go, isn't there like a whole process that...
Yeah, how did we get from A to Z? Like the no warm up.
I wonder it's because they're under pressure. I don't want to assume it's just them being nefarious. It might just be they're under pressure, and so they don't have the time to sort of take you through the process to get to a place where perhaps you can say, I'm still strong, even though I feel extremely weak. And maybe that's why there's a bit of a stigma now around certain faith groups that they're afraid of therapy, or they have nothing to say of therapy, or they even demonize therapy because they would rather people appear to be strong than actually work through the process of, I'm super angry at God, if you believe in God, about the loss I've had. I'm confused as to why he would do me harm, even though he promised to do me good. Will I ever find joy and happiness again if it's kind of rooted to the thing I lost? These are really substantial questions that I think a lot of people are asking in their minds. And it's such a shame when their faith group isn't interested in exploring that with them.
It's really, really difficult to see that and to hear it continually. And what I'm starting to realize, you mentioned, could it be that perhaps these leaders don't have the time to really get into these things? I think it's less a question of time and more a question of space. If they actually have the internal space to accommodate the magnitude of these questions. Because what happens when we encounter a question that we can't independently answer? What happens when actually there are loose ends that we can't find a way to tie together? And we can't say, okay, this in and of itself is a kind and good thing to have happened, because even despite the fact that it's causing you pain, we can't directly kind of link our faith in that simplistic way. That does require space, not just to be able to sit with these questions and allow for the grappling, but to allow someone else to come in and answer questions that we can't. And that would mean that God would have to transcend us. There has to be room for transcendence. And in many religious practices, there isn't actually true ground level room for transcendence in that respect, i.e. I don't have the answers. I'm insufficient in my understanding, in my wisdom to answer that question, but I know someone who does. And I think when we realize that if we are forming a worldview that we must be able to accommodate in our own minds, then we've become our own gods. If we can't yet see that, then we find ourselves in a real problem when we encounter a question that we can't answer. And I think that's, in my mind, where actually Christ stands alone, because very often is the case that we come across questions that we don't have the answers for. And he's ready to start grappling with us and showing us things that we didn't know, that we didn't understand. And that's really, for want of a better phrase, the magic of what I see happening within therapy in these moments, amidst the unanswered questions, amidst the rubble that we can't quite make order or sense of. We see God charting a path and creating order and design in ways that I find magnificent. And it really shows us that there is a real God who is actually interested in you being able to make some degree of sense of what you're experiencing, but also to be able to invest faith and hope in someone who's able to do what we can't, and to answer those questions and to take us to places that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to get to without him.
In your practice, what are some of the most common, emotional, sort of mental health challenges that you see when people walk through the door? I'm just trying to get a sense of, because you'll have a really interesting sort of eye or vantage point on like the general health of the public. Like, so when people come to you or come to your practice and speak to, people who work there, like what's the common?
Oh, yeah. I love how broadly we can help people. When I think of, I'm trying to think of themes, I'm also thinking, my goodness, the range, it's incredible. I would say anxiety and depression come up very frequently. These are challenges that we're always hearing about in the media, always hearing about in the news as things that really trip people up and stop them from being able to interact with their lives in the ways that they would like to. So anxiety and depression are pretty big.
By the way, what is, I'd love you to finish that list, but I want to come back to sort of define some of these terms, because I think they've accrued so much in the media and people mean so many different things. So some people, I think when I think of anxiety, I think about nervousness, but that's probably not what it is, and so there's probably a work to be done on even defining terms and reclaiming them back from, whatever, but carry on, sorry.
It's so true. When things make their way into kind of popular culture parlance, they do get diluted and misconstrued. Anxiety, I would say, it's an experience of threat. Now that could be real or it could be perceived, but it really is your system gearing up to address or look at some kind of threat. Now, the response that we have is really, it's kind of centered on who's gonna fix this. What are we gonna do about this? And so anxiety can be quite a high energy state. We see all of the kind of sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight stuff coming up, heart rate, as you say, that sense of nervousness and shakiness. You can find poor concentration, difficulty to hold on to any particular task at any point in time. And diagnostically, you need to see these symptoms over a protracted period of time. So usually a few weeks to a month. And that's the same for depression. I think sometimes we get a bit gung-ho with these phrases and say, I'm feeling so depressed. Well, actually, no, you're just sad today because of the thing that happened a few hours ago, and you'll probably feel better tomorrow or the next day. So these diagnoses really need to be seen in the broader context of someone's actual life experience and not just a very brief period of time.
I've been told that depression is habitual worrying. Does that make sense? Is that true? Is that false?
I think it's poetic. I don't know if it's accurate. But it's habitual worrying.
So when you make worrying like your default sort of condition or state of mind, this is something I heard on the podcast. Please correct me.
Interesting. It's cool that we're on a podcast now to discuss this. Wow, it's good to debunk.
The person wasn't a therapist, I should say. They weren't a doctor. They were just.
And I could kind of hear that from when you make worrying your default. That's interesting. It kind of suggests that our experiences don't directly inform the way that we see the world. And sometimes the ways that we've come to understand the world are nothing to do with us. So much of it is to do with what we have been modeled, what's been shown to us. And the rules that are set in terms of how to navigate the world are often set very early on, sometimes before the age of 5 years old. So very, very early on, we start to understand what's safe, what's not, who's safe, who's not, what is possible for you and what's not possible for you, who's going to come and help when you're in trouble and who's not. And so when those rules get laid down so early on, by the time you get to 25, you're not thinking, oh, it's because I learned this thing when I was small. It's because when I cried, mum didn't come or dad wasn't there when I needed him. You just know this is down to me. I have to figure this out. And oftentimes you find people who are highly successful in their field, fully competent. People would describe them as really efficient workers, first one in, last one out, always getting the job done, because they double and triple and quadruple check everything, because it's all down to them. There's no one else that's going to come and help. And these rules can invisibly govern our lives for so long until we take stock of, hang on, how have I come to actually understand my place in my environment, and how close or how willing people are to be close to me and to support when I'm going through things. So yeah, sometimes we make choices when it comes to the way that we view the world, and sometimes choices are made for us, and it's important to be able to tell the difference between those. Depression is, I think the statement that your system is kind of making is, there's no hope here. Nothing good can come of this point. It's an experience of despair. In the same way that at a very deep, almost spiritual level, anxiety is an experience of fear, I would say depression is an experience of despair. It's saying there's a dead end. There's a real hopelessness. There's a worthlessness. There's a finitude to things, a futility to things. You can even feel the weight in the room as I'm talking about this, right? That's what it feels like in therapy when someone comes in and they sit. Even before speaking, I think now my system's kind of cultivated to pick this up, and I'm like, that's depression. It's heavy in the room. You can feel it in the pauses, in the in-betweens.
That's really good. I mean, I just wonder then, there's a question I think some people may be thinking, which is, okay, cool. Suppose, anxiety or depression or anything else I may be dealing with, is there anything I can do about it in and of myself, or do I have to go to therapy? Is therapy for everyone, essentially? Because this is something that, I was talking to a friend about the other day, if one friend asks another friend, have you been to therapy? And they're like, oh, no, I don't think I need it. They're like, yes, you do. You should go to therapy. Everyone has to go to therapy. You kind of wonder, is that true? Is it that we all need to, explore these thoughts with somebody else that's external to us? Or are there things I can do in my day-to-day to maybe, pursue better emotional health and stuff like that?
Yeah. I would say that transformation by conversation is for everyone. Therapy can be a really useful context for that. For most people, therapy is going to be very, very useful. Now, if you are in a position where you can begin to interact with that kind of transformative dynamic, whether that's journaling, so starting to interact with your own thoughts outside of yourself, or whether that's with a trusted friend, a mentor, someone that you feel you can, without any kind of filtering or editing, share of your internal experience, and for them to reflect back to you what it is that you're sharing. If you have contexts like that, it can be really useful to begin that work of actually starting to unpick some of the things that you're experiencing through this anxiety. So maybe starting to slow down and think, okay, when does this anxiety come up? When did it start? Did I have a life before this sense of anxiety, existed? And what did that life look like? So what might have changed? It's just starting to become a little bit of a detective, start asking these questions. And the same with depression and other kind of experiences like this. I do think that there are some behavioral things that we can start to do. I think therapy, different modalities of therapy work in different ways. The kind of talking therapy, the psychotherapeutic getting into the detail of things, tends to be thought of as kind of top down. You're looking at what's happening in the brain and maybe in the soul, and then seeing how that plays out behaviorally in life. But there are some bottom up things that we can do. So when you're depressed, you tend to want to not really be around the happy people. Everyone else is having a great time. I'm not. That's a lie that we tend to believe. So you tend to withdraw. You tend to not really engage in the things that you used to take pleasure in before. And so simple things like opening your windows in the morning, choosing to make sure that you're waking up at a decent time each day. And it's going to be hard. So maybe recruiting a friend to say, hey, could you call me and make sure that I'm out of bed by this time? You're not going to feel like doing it at first. It's not going to be fun. It's not going to be enjoyable. But what it is going to do is start kicking up your nervous system into an active phase of working, and that in itself can provide the kind of motivation to start looking at, okay, how did I get here? How did things get here for me? When did I start feeling like this? Is there someone I can go and speak to? It's called kind of behavioral activation. That's stuff that can happen at the beginning. It's stuff that you can start doing from early on by yourself or with trusted friends. There does usually reach a point where you think, okay, I'm going to need some more input to really understand the roots of this, but also chart a clearer path forward for more enduring outcomes. And I think that's where therapy can be really useful. And also for people who find those initial steps really difficult, actually it's not as easy to do that by yourself. So to have someone to help lay out the plan and also kind of walk with you through it is a really useful thing in therapy.
I do want to get your take on, some interesting quotes that I've heard, especially on the grief topic. But the reason I ask you about what people can do individually is because there does appear, and I don't know if this is just perception or if this is true, and I hope you can sort of correct the record, there appears to be a sort of shortage of like black therapists or like black female
Appears
therapists
to be?
or black female Christian therapist. Like, it just gets because the amount of people I have, and I know, obviously I know you outside of this, and I've sent you so many different people over the years. And even now there's still people who message me like, I'm looking for a black female Christian therapist. And I'm like, I know one.
I know a few.
I'm not sure if you'll have the time, but I know one because I don't know. I mean, how important is diversity in this kind of?
So important. As much as we say that you don't need for your therapist to have gone through exactly what you've gone through to be able to empathize with you and connect with you. And I've worked with therapists myself who aren't from my kind of demographic, who aren't at all, from the same background that I'm from. And it's been really useful work. But there's something in being able to see someone who looks like you, who understands your context, with whom you don't have to define your shorthand, your way of kind of interacting with the world, that it kind of greases the wheels of therapy. So much of therapy is about a therapeutic relationship. It's about finding the kind of person that you can actually naturally connect with. Like if it were outside of this space, we might be friends, or we might get on really well as colleagues, or whatever that is. That really helps. That therapeutic relationship, so much happens because it becomes a microcosm of life itself. The different relationships you're grappling with, some of those patterns start to play out in the therapeutic relationship. And you need to feel safe and grounded enough in that connection to be able to use it well, even as a client. As a therapist, you can actually leverage that connection as well and understand nuance and detail about someone's cultural background that perhaps someone from outside of that context may not be aware of and may begin to advise, in contrast to, and that might be kind of challenging. So it's useful to have people who understand where you're from and can connect with you on that level such that there's real depth and context to the material that you bring to therapy. It does make a difference. And yet there is a shortage, I think, of black therapists in general. In training, you will often see a sea of less melanated faces and the odd black person here and there. And black men as well, black male therapists are quite rare. So I do see that more of us are coming into the space, and it's really encouraging to see. It's something that I love to do as well, to connect with black therapists, black female therapists, black Christian therapists, because together we work better. And I think that's really the ethos of our psychotherapeutic practice. Ida therapy itself was predicated on the basis that this is not the job for one person. You don't do well alone. And I think psychotherapists historically have really been one-man shows. You go to your therapist, who kind of sits in a corner and he works alone, and that's fine. And they usually have some sort of clinical supervision. But I wanted to see us actually working together, that we're a collective of therapists who can share ideas, who can learn continually from each other in this kind of multidisciplinary context where you have people who are specialists in their different niches, in their different fields, pouring in that kind of wisdom and expertise to benefit all of the clients that we serve. So the better connected we can get, the better it's going to be for all of our clients. And that's really the way that we work at IDO. So we're always on the lookout. Oh, is there another black therapist? Or let's have a conversation. Let's see, how we can support. Yeah.
This is so good. And I think, there was a lot that's achieved. I mean, on one of the other podcasts, I was talking to someone about representation. We say representation and people kind of go, yeah. But there is a lot achieved by hearing. Yep. And seeing people who look like you doing something that you never thought you could do. Yeah. And I just always wonder, in one of the viewers today or listeners, is there someone who's going, you know what, this is actually something I could do by virtue of listening to you. I want to shift gears and talk to the therapist, a little bit about the fact that, I mean, we spoke about grief at the top end of this, and the goal was always to visit there. mainly to try and, I suppose, for some, is give them a toolkit, if you like, for dealing with loss, right? And for others, is maybe give them some things to chew on now that might make the journey somewhat easier for them. Full disclosure, both of us have experienced loss recently, very recently. And so that probably colors a bit of this. But, there's one quote which is really fascinating to me, because it kind of does two things in my mind, and you can let me know what you think. One is, it kind of makes you think, what's the point? And then the second thing is, it makes me think, what kind of system is this? And the quote is, grief is the price of love, right? So grief is the price of love.
Such good questions that you have off the back of that. What a bump is this? This is terrible. I didn't sign up for this.
Because it almost means the more you love somebody whilst they're here, or the more you love something whilst it's here, the more expensive the price is when the grief comes.
This is it. So you might as well not love, right? You might as well not feel. You might as well not connect. But it is so antithetical to our nature to even consider that. We can't help but feel. We can't help but love. We're actually built for this. But this is really what speaks to the core of the tragedy of our existence on Earth in this iteration. The fact that everything is kind of subject to entropy, is all headed towards disorder and decay. But it also tells us that if this is something so grand, so precious, that we can experience in connecting with someone and just saying, I'm here for your interests. I desire your best simply by virtue of being you. You don't have to do anything for me. To be able to experience that phenomenon of loving someone or loving something, it's a gift. But we also see that it stands in such stark contrast to the devastation of losing that person or thing, which tells us, did these things always coexist? Was this system always the way that it is now? And I would say no. Actually, it wasn't designed to be like this. When I remember my first week in medical school, we came in and they said, you have to get your white coats on. We're going to go into the dissection labs. Now, at UCL, there's a building called the Cruciform Building, and down in the basement of the Cruciform, it looks like Hogwarts. It's quite amazing. You go down into the basement, and there's just this long warehouse-like room, and they flick on the lights. There's kind of halogen that just flicks down the long building, and you just see rows upon rows of tables, these kinds of gurneys that are just laid out, and they have white sheets on them, and there are people who've donated their bodies to science, right? And they say, in the course of your study, you're going to be allocated one or two people that you're going to be working on. You're going to be exploring the human body through their sacrifice. And this is something that we want you to be grateful for. And after your year, in the section this year is done, every year they hold a second funeral for this person, where the loved ones of the person who's donated their bodies come, and we can thank them. And I just remember them uncovering our particular cadaver, our person who'd given their body, and they pulled back the sheet. And they had already kind of opened up the chest. It's a lot of detail, guys. But then seeing that, just standing in that room, the smell of formaldehyde filling the air, I just had the strongest impression. And it just said, you were never meant to see this. This was never meant to be the case. And it was so clear and so quietly devastating, that realization that death was never meant to be part of the story. We experience it because we were always designed to connect. Disconnection was never meant to be part of this experience. And that's why it is so fundamentally devastating to us. That's why it's so hard to say goodbye, because we weren't designed for goodbyes. We weren't designed for finitude. We were designed for eternity. Yeah. And that's the grapple that we are constantly having to fight against and to work our way through as we exist on this side of eternity. Having to do something like that.
It's mind-boggling.
It is. It really is.
I mean, even just the idea of, especially if maybe, let's talk about people, if the person you knew was full of life, was energetic, was sort of just always moving, to experience them in a form where they are totally still.
You're supposed to say something, like move, laugh, make a joke now.
Yeah.
This is you.
Yeah, it's a lot. I guess, I start there because I think for a lot of people, grief just starts as just a heavy feeling. Yeah. I say that, but I don't have any experience in walking someone through it. But I mean, is that true? Is that how most people experience it, like a weight? that just feels unbearable, and you're like, how on earth do I carry this?
Yeah, when you begin to actually experience it, there's like a pre-experiencing phase where there's the shock and the numbness, and you can make a choice in that moment. It's, do I fully feel this, or is this just not something I'm prepared to even deal with? So then we can get caught up in the practicalities. Okay, there's a, a service of songs, there's a funeral, there are things to arrange, there are affairs to be organized. And so we don't have to, in the initial phases, really grapple with the gravity of the finality of needing to say goodbye to this person and needing to accept that they're not here. So in that initial phase, it can feel quite light. Actually, people can feel quite energetic and quite able to kind of do things. It's very do, but that's actually, I need to do, because if I don't do, then I will feel. And that may be too high a price to pay right now. When you begin to feel the yawning chasm that is the void that's left by this person or thing, that can feel heavy, it can feel overwhelming, it can feel bigger than you. And so you get a very physiological reaction at that point. People often feel exhausted, often feel quite tired, quite drained. Again, it's similar to the symptoms of depression, difficult to engage with the things that usually you'd find enjoyable, poor concentration, difficulties with sleep, difficulties with interacting with the people that you love, all of those kinds of things. So first, it can feel quite visceral, quite tangible. And then the thoughts of, my goodness, this life is not the same. Oftentimes people talk about, oh, before this person passed away and after this person passed away. It forms a kind of checkpoint in many people's lives, because so much changes as a consequence, depending on the degree of the loss. But yeah, so from there, it's now we're seeing and acknowledging this loss. I think that's the first task, actually being willing to confront the feeling and to say, okay, this has happened, this person or this thing is no longer here. And just to accept that can come with a lot of sadness, a lot of the kind of crying, the classic grief that we see. And then from there, we now move to counting the cost of that loss. So what are the implications of this person not being here anymore? What does it mean I'm not going to experience with them, or that I used to experience? What does it mean for my future without them? What are they not going to be part of? What am I not going to be able to experience with these people? So it's counting the cost of that loss.
And why is it important for someone to count the cost of the loss?
Because grief is sneaky, and it will kind of creep up on you. It's not linear. The process never is. But if you're willing to entertain the fact that this person's not going to be involved in these different aspects of your life anymore, it will be less of a shock when those moments come up. Working with people who've lost a parent, for example, as a single person, it might be needing to come to terms with the fact that the person they're dating won't be able to meet their parent as their spouse. They might have children that will not meet their grandparent. And being able to come to terms with that and reconcile yourself to the reality of that now, not to the experience, because you'll only feel that when you're there, but just the reality of it will help to soften the blow as you get to that point, and also to contextualize it in normal grief experience. It is normal to feel these things, and it's normal to feel that pang of loss again when you come to those new spaces and you think, man, if that person was here, it would have been incredible, So it's allowing yourself to feel what you're feeling now, and also to hold space for your future self in those spaces where this person will no longer exist.
I mean, I always wonder, as someone who is often helping folks through something like this, what, again, as comfortable as you feel sharing, how does your process go? I mean, do you kind of go, okay, these are the 4 things I know to do at this moment, if you're dealing with loss yourself, or if you're dealing with any of these things? Do you go back to what you know? Do you seek out a therapist? I mean, how does it work for someone who is sort of used to helping other people navigate this?
I think the answer to this is also useful when we're thinking about therapy versus doing it yourself. Like, can I just figure this out? It's far easier in many respects to walk with someone as they experience something than to have to walk that road by yourself. When suddenly it's your own, it's very difficult to see yourself when you're the one living the story. To accompany someone is to hold the benefit of perspective on them. You can be a mirror to them because you can see them. It's difficult. It's more difficult to see yourself. The benefit of being in a space like psychotherapy is that you you do get in contact with some frameworks, some practical means of defining and contextualizing your experience. And that can be useful just in understanding, okay, I can see we're in this general district, this general area. Right now I'm angry, and it makes sense that I'm angry because this person's supposed to be here. As far as I was concerned, this was the plan, and the plan is not working out the way that I'd intended it to. But that's useful because that's the beginning of a conversation with your perspectives, your worldviews with God, to say, actually, I realized that actually my foundation was that I had a plan here, and this is not going to my plan. Now, does that align with what it is that you said this life was going to be or how it was going to roll? So that can be quite useful. But ultimately, for me, being able to speak to other people who can also represent mirrors to me has been pivotal. Having my own therapy, speaking to pastoral care, getting in touch with friends, and just being able to call someone in the middle of the night and just cry has been so powerful. To be seen in your experience and to know that you're not by yourself. Also to know that it's not abnormal to feel these things, and that it takes the time that it takes. Again, grief is not linear. We almost think about it like a washing machine. It goes one way and then it goes the other way. It goes a bit further that way, another time. So it's being patient with yourself in the process, but understand that as you zoom out, there is a trend that it's not so much you feel the pain less, but life begins to grow around the pain. And sometimes more color and context is added to that experience as time goes on, so long as we're patient enough to bear the pain for long enough to see the picture develop.
One of the most sort of, I think, eerie, odd things I've seen sometimes is when I'm feeling pain or I know people who are in pain, there is a temptation to almost lean into that pain and not sort of actually seek help. I don't know if there's a term for it when, I don't know if it's self-sabotage or I don't know what it is when, let's say you're feeling super lonely, and you're like, oh, I have a million people I can text. But something in your mind's like, no, you should stay in this and be lonely and stay bitter and stay. So how does one fight that feeling of almost wanting to, to say your point, rather than calling someone at 3 a.m. and crying, you're like, I would rather be alone, cry alone, be by myself, whatever. How do you fight that? Because I think another sort of mental battle most people may have when they process this is how to invite people in and not to kind of go, no, me, stay sad, stay bitter, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's really hard actually to do that, particularly when you're not someone who's accustomed to living life as openly as that, or maybe asking for help is a challenge. It's difficult when you find yourself in an incredibly vulnerable position, as grief naturally is, because I'm on the back foot. This has destabilized, my stance, at least temporarily. So it sometimes is really challenging to allow yourself to be seen in that vulnerability. But this is where assessing your relationships and seeing who's safe and who you can trust to see you as you, regardless of what emotional state you're in.
So not everyone's safe.
Not everyone is, because again, remember when we were talking about the ministers having time but actually having space. Not everyone has that internal capacity to hold room for someone to feel something that they don't customarily feel. We're very good at being pattern recognition machines as human beings. We say, oh, Jim's always happy. He's great. Like he's great for a laugh. Love going out for a drink with him. Jim's great. Oh, Susan, she's always grumpy. Always has something to complain about. We like to typecast people. We put people into boxes. This is you. This is who you are. So when you're not happy, you're not yourself. What's going on? You're not allowed to experience. Customarily, in normal social settings, you're not allowed to experience the full range of human emotion and be seen consistently as yourself. Because we tend to associate people with their personality or their particular moods, when we see them. So not everyone has the space to hold you in distress when they see you as a leader, when they see you as competent at work, when they see you as handling everything. So we need to start, number one, cultivating relationships where we're willing to see someone at their lowest ebb and still see the value in that person, still see them at the same time with all of their strengths and all of their assets, understanding that two things can be true at the same time. I think that's really important for us to make that mindset shift as a people. So that's the first thing that needs to happen, really.
I love that, because I think one of the things any negative emotion forces you to do, an extreme negative emotion, is really reassess the current system you have. So the reason I remarked at the safety point is because, I've said before that I think people really can only meet you at a depth they've gone to themselves.
Yeah.
So one thing you find when you're experiencing a certain emotion is some people just have no clue
No,
because they've
just
never
like,
been like they've kind of only navigated life on level 1.
Yeah.
So you're now
I've
at level
literally
5,
had-
and they're
yeah.
like, oh,
Yeah, I've had people say, I actually I don't know what to do with this. You're the one that's in control. And I'm like, oh Jesus. There's no space for me to actually just be a human, and that's tragic.
It's really sad because it can feel like almost double grief if, let's say, you've lost a really important person, and you've had a best friend so far who's always there for like the good times, and they're always supporting you, and in this moment they're just mute or silent, they don't say anything. It can almost feel like, hold on, it's like I've lost two.
Yeah.
That and you realize maybe that person doesn't have the depth, doesn't have the. I mean, how does one move on from that? Do you just accept that, okay, this person's only there for good times? You kind of go, maybe this isn't the kind of person I should have in my life anymore.
Which all of those, I think, are kind of reactions that people have. People sometimes just think, okay, you know what? Yeah, I'm done with you. You clearly are not my kind of person. And I think sometimes that is kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We do need to acknowledge that people have the capacity that they have at this point in time, and it takes a while. I think you do have to acknowledge the pain of, man, I thought that I could trust fall and you could catch me, but turns out I'm on the floor and you're looking at me quizzically. So you do have to acknowledge, yeah, that burned. That's not cool. It's not nice to feel that. But at the same time, what has facilitated this situation? What has meant that actually you didn't have what I thought you had when I needed it? So some of that comes down to our assessment of the person, and have we read you too shallowly, actually? Have we not checked to see, whereabouts you are in your own development? And then maybe it's seeing if we can hazard a conversation, if we can see, when I shared this with you, it didn't seem like it really made sense, or it seemed like it was quite difficult for you to kind of sit with that. What was that about for you? What was that like for you? Seeing where the person is. And then once we get an appreciation of where someone is, it's to accept that that's their capacity at this point in time. There's always capacity for people to grow if they choose to grow. And if this person is like, I didn't know what to do at the time, I didn't know what to say, I still want to be able to help you, but I just don't know. That's useful, because this is someone who's willing to learn and develop, the skills and the ability to be able to connect with people in pain. And you can do that. You can read, you can speak to people who have been through hard things, you can learn skills. And also through their own experience, as time goes on, they'll become more equipped in their ability to support as well. And I think there are several steps before, okay, cut this person off. They're not for you. Sometimes we can be a bit gung-ho with that.
Yeah.
But,
I just think, one of the most powerful things I had, or some friends told me when I lost my mum, was people just saying stuff like, well, listen, I don't really know how you're feeling, and I don't really know what I can do, but and if you want to text, like, I'm here.
I'm
sort
here.
of thing. And I think one of the most infuriating things I heard, and I didn't think I would care, because I'm relatively kind of like, nonchalant, I slip off my back. I don't hold grudges. I want to stay light, positive, whatever. But I remember when someone told me months after it happened, and they were like, oh, I didn't want to message you at the time. I just thought you'd be super busy. And I thought to myself, it's been 4 months.
How busy can one person be?
Now I really did think about this, because I thought, if I try to see things from their perspective, but I couldn't, because I thought to myself, could you really love somebody and you see that they're in deep pain, and you don't say anything for 4 months because you didn't want to? I
can understand that. Yeah,
I could be being over dramatic. So if I could workshop that with you, how would you react to that?
That would be so useful, because if you could get those two people in the room and actually one person expressing like, it really felt like you didn't love me because you weren't there, we might be able to get some context from the other person. This is such a big thing to happen to someone. And if they're viewing you, if maybe you're in a position where actually it seems ostensibly that you're surrounded by loads of people, they might not want to get in the way. They might not want to throw things off. You're quite a high profile person. They're just like, oh goodness, there must be so many different, activities and then things around this. But also, we don't have the backdrop of their interpretation of loss and pain. We don't know what that means for them. We don't know how the unanswerable questions land on their heart and how big that yawning chasm feels to them. It can be quite scary to have to confront that kind of finality with someone that you love. I don't want to make you despair even more deeply when your despair meets my despair, because I don't have the answers here. And feeling that kind of insufficiency can be really paralyzing for people, such that they may not actually reach out. They may not be close because I don't have anything of value, I don't feel, to offer to this situation. I don't want to make things worse. So it really does depend on their backdrop, on the canvas that the situation is landing on for them as well.
But it seems as though those parties have to, in some ways, come together to exchange this.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's
conversation.
It's just impossible to know. You might, you might say back, well, if you're thinking that much about, like, I mean, shouldn't you just run towards them and be like, hey, how can I support you?
If you are of that disposition.
But some people aren't.
Are more careful, more cautious, not wanting to kick up or come in and make a mess, and make things worse. And for some people, that's more of a guiding kind of principle than just, hey, just come in and help. Doesn't matter, even if you get it wrong, at least you're here. It depends on how you view these things, which is why kind of group therapy, friends therapy, couples therapy is so useful, because it's like, we can actually sit in a room and we can have these conversations and say the things that have been difficult to articulate. So then, transformation can occur even within those connections.
So one of the things I want to do with you now, we've had, people in our team knew you were coming in. So they were like, this is great. So they sent in questions.
Ooh,
We've got questions, sort of, I don't know if they're quick fire, actually.
Ooh.
This is like people trying to get therapy for a discount. They should go and support the practice and go that way. But I have a few questions I'm going to ask you, and I'd love to get your take on them. And this speaks to the range of things that viewers and listeners may be listening to as well.
Yeah.
So here we go. Okay. These are some of the questions that were sent in. Okay, so let's start with, how do you advise someone who's struggling with guilt or shame, especially when it comes to their relationships?
Guilt and shame. Wow. That's so broad. How do you deal with guilt and shame when it comes to I'm presuming that it's to do with events within the relationship. Correct. Or something around that. Number one, acknowledging it. I think it's more difficult to deal with anything that you're not willing to look full in the face of. So actually identifying, okay, I am feeling guilt around this. I am feeling shame regarding that. And then having a look at the relationship. What is the significance of this connection with this person? Is this a connection that you desire to see endure, to continue as a relationship? If so, can this relationship, does it currently possess the resilience to bear through this particular turbulence, the turbulence of guilt or the turbulence of shame? If there's guilt, it suggests that something has happened and that you're feeling bad about. So is there room to have a conversation with this person around these things and maybe share some of what you're feeling guilty about? Is there an apology that's in order that hasn't yet occurred? Maybe that's something that needs to happen as well. And also working with the person to see if there needs to be a change in the dynamic of the relationship that can be useful. There's something that we need to do differently. There's something that I can do differently here. And actually, if the person says, actually, you're doing what you need to do, it's okay. That thing was painful and it's past, but we've learned and we're growing. To begin to work on believing what you're hearing from the other person in the way of reassurance as well. But communication.
This is good. I mean, I have to know. A lot of these questions are general. Yeah. Maybe the team doesn't want me to know exactly who it is.
Yeah.
So there's only so much you can say about general. Yeah. But this next one asks about emotional resilience. So it says, what are practical ways for me to build emotional resilience? I've heard of exposure therapy. What would you say to that?
If we're talking about exposure in the sense of being exposed to your actual experience and dealing with the things that prevent you from being exposed to your experience. So escapism tactics. If I know that if I'm feeling something too much, I'll go and hang out with friends, or I'll call a guy that I like or a girl that I like, or I will immerse myself in gaming or go and eat loads of food, then I know that I'm actually using some means of distracting myself from the gravity of what I'm experiencing. So gradually building up a tolerance to your actual internal environment to say, okay, I'm actually feeling sad right now. That's what I'm feeling. Being able to name the emotions is really useful. So developing a means to do that. There are lots of resources online that can help you identify what you're feeling. And therapy is going to also help give language to what you're experiencing. there's a principle called externalizing that we use often in therapy, and that's taking what you're feeling and quite literally bringing it out. So whether that's speaking and, recording yourself or writing in a journal, but what that does is it gives your feelings context in terms of dimension. You can fit it in a word. That means it's not overwhelming because there's a definition for it. And that immediately takes some of the steam out of it, takes some of the momentum out of it. So that you can begin to see, okay, so this is what feeling heartbroken looks like and feels like. This is what feeling rage feels like and looks like. But I can feel this and identify and can see myself feeling it. And so I can become more objective about my emotions, such that I can acknowledge them and they can inform me without instructing me, without directing my life. I can make decisions as informed by them, but they don't have to dictate what happens hereafter. So actually acclimatizing yourself to the fact of emotions and to the function of them, that's what they're here for.
Really good. I mean, folks should come and book a session, and that's how you can get into all the detail. But I think even that provides value for people. Okay, for someone struggling with forgiveness, whether towards themselves or someone else, what steps would you recommend for them to begin the healing process? Forgiveness.
Forgiveness is a big deal, and I think for creatures that are born without knowledge to a great extent, yes, we have a number of reflexes, but really we learn everything else. We're remarkably bad at forgiving. So we're making errors all the time. We err our way into kind of a correct way of being. That's why we're students. That's why we go to school and we learn and we eventually achieve degrees and things like that. But you didn't start off your degree on an A. You started off rubbish. You didn't know anything. And that's how teachers were there to give you the information. So it's actually thinking through the journey of life, actually understanding I wasn't born an expert at anything. No one was. No one got to where they are overnight. Everyone had to learn. And I think in accepting that is a pattern of a human being, you start to come to terms with your own frailties, with your own shortcomings, with your own learning process and your learning edges. And that's quite relieving to your system. It takes a lot of pressure off of your system to be perfect all the time. And it also takes a lot of tension out of your relationships where the bar is so high and the standing of the people in your life so precarious that any slight infraction could result in, the fracture of a relationship. It doesn't have to be that way. No one was born an expert at anything, particularly connecting with people. We're quite good at breaking relationships and messing things up, but it takes a bit more work to repair. So yeah, I think understanding your frame as a human being, like welcome to the human race, you're going to mess up, but we can learn and we can grow. And that is a special gift of being a human as well.
What are some of the common misconceptions people have about mental health?
I think now it's kind of changed from when I started working. At first, it's like, oh, they have mental health issues. It's like, oh, it's a secret taboo thing. And also mental health was used as a proxy for mental illness. He has a mental illness. No, mental health is something that we have in the same way that you have physical health. And these are just measures of how you're doing internally. But now I feel like people are coming to a space where, yeah, I have this condition, I have anxiety, I have depression. That becomes the end of the sentence. This is me. This is an expression almost of my personality. It helps to explain why I don't really want to be around you for too long, or I don't want to do certain things. And it is allowed to govern the shape of your expression in the world. For me, diagnoses are useful in that they identify a constellation of symptoms that we can recognize to a certain extent. We can interact with a certain system that gives us some inroad into grappling with the core issues. But that's kind of where the utility ends, because it can't dictate your life, and it doesn't have to. It can only do so if you allow it to. Diagnosis can be the beginning of the sentence, and I think when it comes to mental health, we are all grappling with something. It's useful to identify that, such that we can support each other in the grappling and understand, look, there are questions that we're trying to figure out the answers to. There are ways that we can be more gentle with each other as we do that kind of exploration, and not write people off as this is a person with that, or because of this label you now fit into this box, as we so customarily do. I do think it does require for us to see that mental health issues are widespread, but it's also part of us trying to make sense of our internal and external environments. And if we accept that, then we can accept that these things can change as we learn and grow. We can see something new, which helps us to feel something new, to understand something new, and to do something new. Simply because this is a diagnosis now doesn't mean it has to be forever, and it has to be always associated with your person. So I think there's a real plasticity about our experience that we don't often acknowledge when it comes to mental illness right now. Yeah.
So good. I mean, I really could just carry on. Do you know what I mean? I think some people listen like, yes, carry on. I kind of want to, have you end on almost where we began, which is, you make no qualms about being a Christian therapist, right? And for you, there is no sort of dichotomy. There is no tension, as we've spoken about in this conversation already. How can people integrate sort of prayer, meditation, scripture reading? What's your vision of this integration between people's faith and sort of therapeutic practice?
For people who know God, who understand who He is, and also for people who are curious, I think it's useful to approach this exploration of your being with the understanding that there may be someone who knows a little bit more about this than you do. If there is a God, then He was somehow around before you were. And if He was, He may well have had a hand in the making of you. And if He did, it'd be useful to get His take on what you are understanding or coming to understand of yourself. So in all of this exploration and all of this asking questions of yourself and from others to kind of reflect back to you, your experience, it's opening up those conversations to Him. Like, God, I'm kind of noticing that whenever I'm in this situation, I tend to do this. Why is that? I don't know. I can't see it immediately. I think eventually I might be able to make a connection. But is there anything you want to remind me about? Anything that you want to draw to my attention? Any patterns that I haven't yet identified? Prayer doesn't have to be, okay, we go on our knees and we close our eyes and it has to be very formal and, okay, Father, Lord, and give me insight. Yes, it can be that. Yeah. But sometimes it can be, God, I've just noticed that this is something I always do. And I don't know how to not do this anymore. What do I do? What's your take on this? And also, have you ever dealt with anyone who tends to do this? Like when a big opportunity comes up, they run away. Have you dealt with anyone like that? And then when you go to the Bible, you go and see people, it's like, oh, there were some people that were hiding when, God has called them to a big deal. And I remember people like Gideon, who's like, I'm the least of my household. I'm the least of, my tribe. Why would you be calling me mighty man of valor as God called him? It's like, no, I say what I see. God knew exactly what it is that He identified. So has God ever dealt with low self-esteem? Yeah. Has God ever dealt with fear? Yeah. Has God ever dealt with anger? Yes. Has God ever dealt with lust and sexual difficulties? Yes. All of those things are they run the gamut of the human experience. And I think being willing to entertain the prospect that there might be someone who has some insight to contribute to our view of ourselves is actually really useful. It keeps you humble. It keeps you curious because you realize I don't know everything there is to know about me or about other people. And I'm willing to ask those questions to see if there's something new to be gleaned from this experience as well. So opening up the conversations and seeing what comes up. It's being open.
A question just came to mind as you're saying. I mean, that's so brilliant. If you could sit down with one person in the Bible, either, I don't know if you call them client or patients, but as in your practice, and just sit down with them and really try and help them or listen to them or whatever it is, like who would you sit down with to really understand?
Gosh. Oh man, who would I want? That's crazy. That's such a good question. No one's ever asked me that before. Who would I want to say? I think Solomon would flummox me.
Really?
I think I'd sit with him and just be like, wow. Yeah, I don't know where else we're gonna go with. Yeah, I see what you mean.
The podcast would be like 9 hours long. You drop in all sorts of jabs.
It would be incredible. I think it'd be amazing to sit with him. I think someone like Habakkuk would be really interesting. He carried a lot of we have been here suffering for so long, God. What is your take on this? I'm actually done with this. I'm not going anywhere. I'm standing here and you're going to answer me because enough is enough. And there are many people through scripture who held that perspective, but it's the immediacy of his communication in that particular book of the Bible that I'm just like, right, this is it for you. You're like, if you kill me, but I need to know the answer. And I think we're not as brave with God as I see that he was, and of this cut of the same cloth, that people like David, who's just like, God, people are actually making a mockery of you through the way that you're treating me. You're making yourself look bad by the way that you're allowing things to run in my life. Why are you doing this?
I don't know if I want to sit down with David. I feel like he wouldn't let anyone else speak.
No. It would just be a lot of, yeah,
Go on
okay.
forever. Look how long the Psalms are. I'm like, mate.
He had a lot to say.
He had a lot to say. He had a lot to say about everything.
It would be amazing. Yeah.
That's so brilliant. Thank you so much, Dr. China, for being here. I think this was great on so many levels, and I would love. I mean, I've said it before. I think you need to do more stuff online, and I know you're busy with your practice, but it would be lovely to see you just sharing more and sort of leading conversations. So yeah, thank you so much for being part of this.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy.
Hey, thank you for taking time to watch that video. Here at the Common Sense Network, we thrive on exposing you to different ideas. If you're someone who likes ideas, you like learning new things, hit the subscribe button now and turn on notifications so you're first to hear when we have a new video out.